Hello, Intro to Digital Media, Art 116. This is going to be our first lecture on raster graphics. The first part of this lecture is going to be all of the technical knowledge that you will need for raster graphics. We'll go over what a raster graphic is, and the second part of this lecture is going to be more of the conceptual support for your project to get those creative juices flowing. So without further ado, let's begin this presentation. Raster graphics. So, what does raster mean? Ooh, don't want that. So raster-based software uses a grid of pixels / dots to stimulate a continuous tone image. It's basically bitmap information. See, they're like little rasterized, pixelated squares of data. The quality of a raster image is determined by two things. That first thing is going to be the resolution, the total number of pixels. So you'll notice most web-based applications are going to be 72 pixels per inch, but if you were a photography major and you are printing something out, you're going to want to print at a higher resolution, which is going to be 300 pixels per inch. You also have the bit depth, the amount of information each pixel is capable of displaying. Resolution is simply how many pixels make up the image. More dots means a higher quality, less dots means a lower quality. We describe resolution in terms of PPI or pixels per inch. So we have a 2 by 3 inches at 20 PPI. You can see that's a relatively low resolution. 2 by 3 inches at 45 PPI, a little bit better. 2 by 3 inches at 72 PPI. This is getting slightly better. And then we have 2 by 3 inches at 150 PPI, which is looking much better here. So different mediums require different resolutions. For example, like I just mentioned, most monitors are only going to display at 72 pixels per inch. Most inkjets will print well at 200 pixels per inch, but if you are commercially printing, that application is going to require a minimum of 300 pixels per inch so we can get the highest quality resolution for those professional photos that you're going to sell. Each pixel can contain only one solid color or value. Bit depth or color depth determines the range of colors and values that each pixel can be. We have a little chart down here. So 1-bit, 2 colors, black or white, 4-bit, 16 colors, 8-bit, 256 colors, 16-bit, 65,536 colors, and 32-bit, which I am not even going to attempt to say that number. So 2-bit colors, here's an example right here, black and white. We have 4-bit, you see it's kind of more of a sepia situation going on. Then you have 8-bit, which is going to look pretty standard. And then you have 16-bit, which is going to be a bit better resolution and color. Or I wouldn't say resolution, but rather just more color depth there. So if any of you have taken color theory, it's a similar concept. You have the resolution, the number of pixels across the line, you have your bits, and then you have your bit depth. A note about resolution and bit depth: you cannot simply add more resolution or increase bit depth. What you start with is what you get. You can always go down, but you can't go back up. So if you're shooting, you might want to shoot in RAW, and you can always save it as a JPEG and get progressively less, but you can't start with a 72 PPI JPEG and get a 300 PPI quality photo. So color modes determine how the components of color are combined based on the number of color channels in a color model. There are 3 color modes that we'll be concerned with in this class. That is grayscale, 1 channel, RGB, the 3 channels, and CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, black, 4 channels, which is quite typical for printing. The grayscale color mode has 1 color channel. RGB mode has 3 color channels, which you are also able to separate in your panels in Photoshop. The RGB color mode is based on the additive color model of light. Again, any of you color theory people may recognize this. This is going to be the case for monitors, televisions, projectors, and other light-based systems that use this model. CMYK color mode has 4 channels. CMYK color mode is based on the subtractive color model of pigment. This is the color model used with inks, pigments, paints, and for color printing. So any graphic designers out there, you're going to notice this one. Resolution, bit depth, and color mode can all be set when you create new Photoshop document by selecting New under the File menu. So all of that information is going to be right in here. So that being said, we are going to move on to the more conceptual aspects of raster-based images, and we will get right to that shortly. Maybe take a break, stand up, stretch, and we will be right back. Welcome back, class. Hopefully you got up, took a break, readjusted your eyes, stretched, did some jumping jacks, get that blood flowing, because we are going to now talk about the conceptual aspect of our lecture, and that is going to be a lecture on Dada. Why, you may ask? Because Dada really is the proto-digital art. So, without further ado, Dada was an art movement formed during the First World War in Zurich, Switzerland, as a negative reaction to the horrors and follies of war. The art, poetry, and performance produced by Dada artists is often satirical and nonsensical in nature. So, Dada was really created as an anti-art movement in reaction to the horrors and atrocities of war. Back in 1915, we didn't have drones. So war was a much more personal, bloody, gruesome situation. And these soldiers were left reeling, as well as the civilians, because of this really grotesque brutality. We also have something else happening between 1915 and 1920, which kind of coincides with what's going on now with COVID, and that is the Spanish flu. Now, the Spanish flu also didn't really originate in Spain. They were really the first ones to name it and publicly talk about it, which is where its name comes from. Its origins are less clear than that, but that is also going on just as like a sort of historical context and background to what's going on as this art is being developed. So the birth of Dada can really be traced to a few people. And first we're going to talk about the performance aspect of that. And that performance aspect is going to be Cabaret Voltaire. Hugo Ball was really kind of the person who spearheaded this. There were several people who were involved in this. It was a really kind of like an arts collective, you can think of it. And again, trying to escape the horrors of war fought in Europe, he would host these radical performances by poets. His personal wheelhouse was onomatopoetic performance, which is kind of like making these sounds, right? You can think of it that way. But it was a whole cabaret complete with dancers. They would make their own costumes, which are extremely well-known and popular, and they would conduct these radical performances. So this is Hugo Ball, German poet and writer. He created the cabaret with his partner Emmy to escape these horrors, a place for fantasy and, you know, just imagination to thrive. It was a place of radical experimentation, and he would often perform his sound poems, which are onomatopoetic. Fun word to say. I will link this for you to watch if you want, but we will skip the videos since this is an online class. If you are interested, I highly recommend just going and watching a little bit of it. So this is Cabaret Voltaire. This is the costumes that are super well known. You'll see these pop up even in a contemporary context. A lot of artists will reference this for their own works. So with conceptual art, right, the idea is more important than the art. So getting the idea across is more important than the medium. It's less about the painting and more about the concept. So really, when we're talking about conceptual art, we would be remiss not to mention Marcel Duchamp. He probably is one of the most notable Dada artists. He was a painter, poet, sculptor, and he rejected, you know, painting as retinal art. He was more concerned with making art that would serve the mind. Towards the end of 1912, he decided to leave his painting behind, quote unquote, his retinal art behind and pursue the idea of art. So while European dada movement was more serious in tone, Marcel Duchamp is in New York and he is a bit more playful, less serious. Now, part of this reason is that these wars weren't actually being fought on American soil. So we were already had this level of detachment. While our soldiers may be over fighting in Europe, we're not seeing the firsthand atrocities of war in the United States at this time. Duchamp was a pioneer of the ready-made art movement. So here we'll just talk about, one moment. Here we'll just talk about, this is a lot of these Dada artists have alter egos. So this is his drag alter ego, Mademoiselle Rose Sylvain. Don't know if I'm saying that right. Sorry to any French speakers if I butchered that. So again, Marcel Duchamp, the idea is more important than the actual art. So Prelude to a Broken Arm. And here we have a snow shovel. Now, in Arizona, we can't really relate to this object, but if you are on the East Coast shoveling snow, you know that it is hard work and rather painful on the body. So Prelude to a Broken Arm, we'll let you think about that one for a moment. Now, most of you will probably recognize this. This is his piece Fountain, and this really cuts the link between accepted artist labor and the supposed merit of the work, right? It has been mooted, which just is a fancy word for debated, that in putting the urinal fort as a work of art, Duchamp, who came from a small town near Rouen, close to the battlefields of World War I, was discrediting the power and standing of the virtuoso artists and the critics who sat in admiration and judgment in the same way that those awful atrocities of war had discredited the powers of authority. So really what we're seeing here is a term that we in the art world call institutional critique. So really this is an institutional critique. So Fountain doesn't exist in a vacuum, and there are many Dada artists who are rubbing elbows and working together on pieces, and really it's been posited by several art historians at this point that Fountain was actually the work of Baroness Elsa Freytag Loringhaven. Let's see if she's next on our slides, right here. She is a German-born artist. She came to New York in the early 90s and was associated with Duchamp and other artists like Man Ray. She was known for her assemblages, poetry, and wearing ready-made fashion items out on the streets of New York before ready-made fashion was ever popular. Well, in New York, her mental health suffered. So she inevitably moved back to Europe. And like many artists of this time, she too had an alter ego, which she called R. Mutt. Now, if you notice on that last slide, R. Mutt is actually inscribed on Fountain. So a lot of historians believe she actually gifted this to Duchamp, who then used it as his own work. She eventually moved to Paris, where her mental health improved, but sadly, one night she left the gas on a burner and she passed away in her apartment. So yes, rest in peace, Baroness. So here we see some of her assemblages. She's got little drums. I mean, she has put this all together. It's actually quite striking and really kind of contemporary if you think this is around 1920, most likely. Here we have 1927, another assemblage. And yeah, so proto-digital art. This is a piece that Duchamp made, rotary glass piece. This can be kind of like an interactive and moving system. So this is painted glass, iron, electric motor, and mixed media. Now we might put an Arduino chip in there to program this, but this is really proto-digital art kind of at its finest. So we have the glass plate in motion with Duchamp, and I believe he actually worked on this with Man Ray, if I'm not mistaken. And here we have Man Ray. So Man Ray, he was also part of the New York Dada scene. He was known for his assemblages and photographs. Man Ray worked alongside Duchamp to create some of the first kinetic sculptures. These were the rotary glass, which you just saw, also known as precision optics. This piece was made of painted glass, iron, and an electric motor. 3 years later, Duchamp tried this experiment again, now using a turntable of a record player. He made a series of disc-bearing spirals in 1923 mounted on cardboard. This anticipated the spiral theme that would later appear in the rotary demisphere and the film Anemic Cinema. The revolving disc produced a three-dimensional effect. Man Ray published 2 Dada magazines and one with Duchamp. In addition to his work with Duchamp, he created assemblages with Lee Miller, his photographic assistant and lover. Man Ray reinvented photograph technique of solarization. He also creates a type of photogram he called rayographs, which he described as pure Dadaism. So back in the, let's move forward a little bit. So these are some of his sculptures and assemblages. And now here we're seeing his photographic rayographs montage, and you'll see some solarization as well. Now I want you to keep in mind, with digital art, for us, this is very easy to create. But back in 1924, all of this had to be developed in a dark room on film. So he had to take the film, unroll the film in a dark room, process it, dodge, burn, so on and so forth. So this is all manual, hence proto-digital. Here we see some solarization techniques on the right, and then I believe a rayograph on the left there. So now we are going to move into photographic collage. That being said, we are going to talk about Hannah Höch. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Sorry for all my German speakers out there. She was born in Germany in 1928, so we're kind of moving more to mid-century now, getting closer to mid-century. She was known for her collage photo montage technique that can be seen as proto-Photoshop, right? So the difference between photo montage and collage really is that photo montage pulls from a wide variety of available sources, such as newspapers, print media, etc. They're really kind of interchangeable at this point, but yes. So Hannah Höch, we'll see one of her early pieces to that left side. So cut with kitchen knife, Dada through the last Weimar beer belly culture epoch in Germany. Sorry about that. So here we're seeing themes of war here. You actually see the term Dada. So some themes in her work are obviously political discourse, but she's really also about androgyny and shifting gender roles. These themes all interacted to create a feminist discourse surrounding her work, which encouraged the liberation and agency of women during the Weimar Republic in Germany, 1919 to 1933, continuing through today. Hannah Höch was originally the only female member of the Berlin Dada movement and pioneer, if not the original or originator of photo montage, a medium and method which she used to satirize the Weimar politics and subversively comment on society, gender, and race. So again, these subversive comments on society, gender, and race can be seen as institutional critique. Her most well-known piece, which we saw with the words that said Dada, was the cut through the kitchen knife Republic piece, which symbolizes her cutting through a patriarchal society. The piece is a direct criticism of the failed attempt at democracy imposed by the Weimar Republic. Cut with the kitchen knife is an explosive amalgamation of cut-up images, bang in the middle, the most well-known photograph of the seminal first Dada fair. So she was really the only woman to show as a Dada artist. She was, I believe, the partner of Raoul Haussmann, who we will see next, but she was never treated quite fairly, although she was able to show her artwork, which was unusual. So here we see some more themes of like ethnography on the left, death and deconstruction on the right. These are all things you can do in Photoshop. I will show you various methods. We will learn to mask. We can cut, copy, paste, all that good stuff. Here we see some more about the gender and society. We actually see some of like the ageism things happening here. And again, more on gender. So this is Hannah Höch. Some more of her work. I just think it's really quite nice. And I think that wraps it up for Hannah Höch. So now we're moving into Raoul Haussmann. He was an Austrian artist and writer, one of the key figures of Berlin Dada. His experimental photographic collages, sound poetry, and institutional critiques would have a profound influence on the European avant-garde in the aftermath of World War I. He met Höch in 1915 and they had an affair. He actually, again, was kind of not the greatest guy. He apparently fantasized about killing her, so kind of the original incel. Um, and there's evidence that he was pretty condescending towards her. Even after defending her to be in the fair, he basically said she was never part of the club, which I'm sure she felt. It was, and often still is, a good old boys club. So he was one of the organizers of the first fair and had a periodical. He also reinvented himself as a fashion photographer later in his life. So we're going to look at some of his work here. This is probably one of the most well-known pieces. This is an assemblage, and it's the Spirit of Age. It's a mechanical head. Again, a very prototypical Dada piece. I will link this for you. I really highly recommend watching this video if you don't watch any of the other videos, because it will touch on a lot of the themes of Dada and proto-digital art. Here's some of his photo assemblages, photo montage. You see there's like these like gold coins in Hitler's belly. Again, another institutional critique. Man Baby, the original Man Baby, perhaps. Sophie Taber-Arp, she was born in Switzerland. Now, she is more well known for her marionettes, but also for her textiles. I just wanted to throw this in because, again, there were women. These are also kind of some of these artists are also kind of overlapping with Bauhaus and Fluxus movements. A lot of them don't inhabit just one art space, but rather multiple art spaces. So here's one of her marionettes, an assemblage, a proto-digital collage. And this is actually Café de l'Obit. This is a Bauhaus sort of style cafe made in 1926. Still very classic, if you ask me. We're also going to talk about Max Ernst. He's another person born in Germany. This one is an oil painting. Here we're kind of starting to see a little bit more surrealism. And this is basically a typographic mixed media piece right here. And again, talking about war, Murdering Airplane collage. So Romare Bearden, this is an American artist. He is part of the Harlem Renaissance. He was actually an incredible baseball player and played with the Negro League. He was also very light-skinned, so he was encouraged often to pass for white and play in the white league, but he declined to stay true to his Harlem roots. He's very well known for painting and his mixed media composition, so another American artist here, but again, we're out of the 1920s and we are moving more into the mid-century here. This is another piece of his, Mother and Child from Conspiracy, The Artist as Witness, 1971. This is a photo, lithograph, and screen print in colors on woven paper. So what are some of the characteristics of Dada? So we have irrationality as a response to supposed rationality in response to the war, challenged notions of skill and technical craftsmanship. The idea was the most important component, and we also have coined the term ready-made art. So we're going to move into some more conceptual contemporary work. So here we have Martha Rosler. She is an American artist. She works across many mediums. She was born in actually 1943. This is Body Beautiful or Beauty Knows No Pain, Hot Meat. She also was a performance artist. And a lot of her work has to do with photo montage, photo text works. Thematically, she spans a range of broad topics from everyday life and media through architecture and the built environment, often approached from a female perspective. She is also a leading critical voice within contemporary feminist discourse. Most of her early collage work sought to deconstruct the representation of women in mass media, as well as the domestic expectations placed upon them. In the 1960s, for example, she often merged magazine photography with depictions of ideal homes to create a disjointed effect, thus highlighting the disconnect between the two and shattering the illusion of domestic bliss. Works like Cold Meat 1, Cold Meat 2, and Hot Meat are female torsos that blend in with kitchen appliances like we saw in that first slide, linking frequently commodified female flesh to the preparation and consumption of food. She's very well known for a video piece she did, which if you are interested, you can look up, and is called Semiotics of the Kitchen. So here we have, again, we're seeing themes of war again here as well. Like this is all very relevant stuff. This would have been happening around the time of Vietnam. So always a war going on in the background. Again, we see these themes of domestic bliss. We see the disjointedness of sort of, she's talking more about, you know, sort of narcissism and social media, but this is before social media, really, if you look at the style of that phone. So she kind of, I maybe saw it coming a little bit, right? Again, we have these disjointed images, we have windows, we have this like beautiful mid-century modern looking couch, just like very minimal, but then we have these soldiers, we have war, we have destruction. So last but not least, in a contemporary context, we're going to talk about Kara Walker. She is a contemporary artist who, if you are not aware of, you should definitely get aware of her. She's incredible. She works across a variety of mediums, including sculpture, photo montage, cutout, and print. She is uncompromising, frequently provocative, and explores the themes of race and gender. Frequently, she examines the atrocities of the past and the ongoing tensions that still exist in the United States. Arguably, her most famous works are those carried out on paper featuring black and white cutout silhouettes. I saw this a very long time ago at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It was incredible. She places these silhouettes on a vast white background, the overall effect evocative of shadow puppetry. Infused with Goya, I don't know if you know who Goya the painter is, but she infused with a Goya-esque nightmarish quality, often underscored by dark humor. Her panoramic friezes frequently borrow from historical textbooks to mirror the stereotypical ways in which African Americans were depicted in the antebellum South, with exaggerated features and engaged in extreme acts of violence or sexual explicitness. Walker's use of silhouettes subverts what's originally a genteel tradition in American art history, reserved for family portraits and book illustration, and uses it to poke holes in the romanticized version of America's past. And again, this predates any Black Lives Matter stuff. So this is going on in the late 90s, early 2000s. She's making a lot of work like this. Again, we're looking at some of the themes of the antebellum South, these sort of precious, reserved images, and mixing them up. She also made she had a very large commission at the Domino Sugar Factory that in New York was going to be destructed. Now, obviously, a huge part of the slave trade had to do with sugar cane, and that, you know, is a big part of the use of the material in this work. There's a really beautiful video that I will also link. It's called A Subtlety. It's really just a great video. She talks about it, some curators talk about it, and again, this is pre-COVID, so there's a lot of people visiting this piece, but I highly recommend watching this one as well if you have some time. Okay, we're going to move on to the Fluxus because they are also part of the proto-digital world. Now here we're talking more about performance art. Fluxus was an international interdisciplinary community of artists, composers, designers, and poets who engage in experimental art performances which emphasize, again, the process over the finished product. Fluxus are known for their experimental contributions to different artistic media and disciplines and for generating new art forms. These art forms include intermedia, which is my area of specialty, and it was a term coined by Fluxus artist Dick Higgins. He's a conceptual artist and associated with the Fluxus and video art, which was also pioneered by Nam June Paik and Wolf of Vostell. So intermedia, coined by Dick Higgins. I just want to point out he was from a very wealthy family and studied with John Cage, who we will talk about later in our sound unit. And really the main idea here is entertainment as education. So here we have an intermedia chart to the left, and then we also have George Brecht, who did 2 exercises from Water Yam. So again, this is more about the process, the performance. It's not necessarily about having a beautiful picture to show at the end of it. So consider an object, call what is not the object other, and it's really meant to make you think conceptually in a more abstract sense. So this could be applied to your people really too. Exercise, add to the object from the other another object to form a new object and a new other. Repeat until there is no more other, really blurring these boundaries here. So yes, art is an idea sometimes as well. Here we have Joseph Beuys, Fat Chair. This is a very notable piece that you should all know and will probably come into contact with again. We have his felt suit. This stems from the fact that he was in the war as well. And there was this whole mythology that no one actually knows if it's true or not, but he was shot down in an airplane and the only thing that kept him safe was this wool blanket. So you'll see a lot of felt and wool. We also saw it with Man Ray as well. We have here Atsuko Tanaka, one of my absolute favorite Fluxus artists. She was part of the Gutai group. This is her electric dress, and it was inspired by the post-war neon pharmaceutical advertisements in Tokyo. So Tokyo went from being a largely agricultural society to being industrialized relatively quickly. During that industrialization process, basically all these huge neon billboards went up, and that is where she got the inspiration for this. She didn't actually get her first solo show until the early 2000s. That's almost 50 years after she created this piece. This is her most well-known piece, and to the right, we can see her with it on. She's clothed in a veil-like garment made of close to 200 hand-painted light bulbs. Here, the work lights up sporadically, giving the sensation of an alien-like creature, and according to Tanaka, blinks like fireworks, according to Gutai artists. Tanaka's work symbolizes post-war Japan's rapid transformation and urbanization. She had trepidation about flipping the switch when she wore this. She had a fleeting thought, is this how a death row inmate would feel? In 1950s, people recognized and distinguished gender difference from the surface of clothing. However, Tanaka's work, an attractive design that did not distinguish between male or female on the surface of the clothing. Although Gutai was ahead of its times, her artistic ability was evaluated through recognition, only that she is a woman. So keep in mind, these are not LED lights. These are super hot, some of them fluorescent lights. Oh my goodness, like she is so brave to have even put that on, and that is mildly terrifying. So keep that in mind. Again, proto-digital, these are not LED lights. Here we have Yoko Ono, who some of you may know as John Lennon's wife, but Yoko Ono was first and foremost a well-known Fluxus artist before Lennon. In her performance cut piece, audience members were invited to cut a piece of her clothing and take away the souvenir with them. The way Ono's clothing is cut and torn replicates the clothing of the people of Japan after America dropped the bomb on Japan, the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Her intention to have the audience members take souvenirs home is to have this performance continue on in the world even after she says her part is done. In 1964, Ono published a small book as well, which is very well known in the intermedia and arts community as well, known as Grapefruit. It offers words and images and a set of instructions through which the work of art is completed either literally or through the imagination of the reader. So again, process. Both are, it's delightful and subversive. The influential book was deemed a monument of conceptual art of the early 60s. And Ono has enacted scenarios of her book throughout her career. So if you can get your hands on this, it's a super fun book. Namjoon Paik came to the United States in 1964. So he's really, he's a Korean artist. He was born in Korea, but he has mostly lived in America at this point. He worked with a variety of media and is considered to be the founder of video art. So here we're going from proto-digital and we're starting to move more towards digital, although again, a lot of this stuff is on film. And TV Buddha, which you're looking at here, it's a sculpture of a Buddha that gazes onto its own image relayed through a closed circuit television system. His lifelong exploration of Zen Buddhism and the meaning of meditation are also seen in one candle. So we're also talking about surveillance here. We have TV Garden. kind of, looking at the tension between the outside world, the inside world, technology, and the natural world, which some of you may want to explore themes of that. He was also really inspired by Joseph Beuys, who we looked at earlier. And this is Beuys' voice, 2-channel color video on Laserdisc, antique television cabinets, felt, mixed media, and sculpture. So we're also seeing not just an assemblage, but we're seeing an assemblage of various technologies as well that traverse various decades. Here we also have the concept of the electronic superhighway. Each state has its own thing that it's known for. So, Idaho, potatoes, so on and so forth. This is the final iteration of that. And finally, we come to what are some of the characteristics of fluxes? So do it yourself, playful. The process is just as much a part as the end result, as I think you can apply to life, really. Just enjoy the process. Technology is art, which is applicable to all of us. Writing and theorizing is art, which is going to dovetail into your final artist statement. It's performative, it's immaterial, and anything goes. So hopefully you enjoyed our lecture on proto-digital art. Please let me know if you have any questions or would like any recommendations, and I will speak with all of you very soon. Bye-bye.